John Whittingdale. Normally when we start these interviews, the sort of pinnacle of people's political success is when they're elected to Parliament, which you were in 1992. But my goodness, what a journey you had before then. So in 1982, at the age of 23, you are head of the Conservative Research Department. You're going to be a special advisor to various cabinet ministers. By January 1988, you become political secretary to Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. Where to even begin? Biggest memory from working with Margaret Thatcher?
I mean, it was very intense. Unlike today, when Downing Street is full of huge numbers of people, when I went to work there, it was a very small team, almost entirely civil servants. I was the one political appointee. And so essentially there were sort of 6 or 7 others who would spend a vast amount of time. I would spend probably on average about 3 or 4 hours a day with her, and sometimes with speech preparation and the rest it was a lot more than that. So I had a lot of contact with her, and she was an inspiration to work for. She could be very demanding, and she could be quite fierce occasionally, and I was still, as you pointed out, quite young. So sometimes I was a little bit intimidated, but she was also very sensitive to the people who worked for her, and could be very understanding and compassionate.
Tell us something we don't know about Margaret Thatcher. Is that even possible?
I mean, I'll give you an example actually which illustrates the kind of person she was. She did have an immense sensitivity to people's personal circumstance. So if any member of her staff had any problem, then she would be very concerned for them. I remember one of her private secretaries was going through a very difficult sort of breakup of his relationship, and she said, "Oh no, what are you doing at Christmas? You must come to Chequers." I mean, I suspect there was nothing he wanted to do less than go to Chequers. But you know, and then when David Plunkett's dog died, I remember she spent a lot of time writing a personal note to him in sympathy. And so she had that side of her. She could be very, you know, she was the Iron Lady, she was the conviction politician, she was very tough, but she also had a very compassionate side to her, particularly for the people she knew and who worked for her.
She was the Iron Lady. Do you think it was easier to be an iron politician in the age before 24-hour news media, social media? Is it easy to have such conviction when you're not being sort of battered around with various attacks on a almost minute-by-minute basis? She
always felt that the press were bound not to be nice in what they wrote about her, so she had a policy of not reading it. And indeed, if she saw herself, I mean, she watched the news a lot, but if she came on, she'd turn it off. I mean, she just didn't want to know. And every morning we would meet to go through, you know, the morning meeting, and we were given a press summary by her press secretary, Bernard Ingham, and she read that, but Bernard, you know, obviously left out the bits which perhaps she didn't need to know or would have been upsetting for her. So I think you're right. I mean, I think today things are so different, 24-hour news, social media, Twitter, etc. But her general philosophy, which was, it's always, you know, it's not going to say anything nice about me, therefore better not to read it, actually is a very good philosophy, which, you know, I think you're quite sensible to apply today to Twitter.
Are you on Twitter?
I am on Twitter. And also,
well, you're not following your own advice.
And I get a, well, I'm on it. I generally don't read what people say about me because it's almost always abusive. But no, I mean, Twitter is valuable in terms of getting out messages and telling people what you're doing, etc.
So you work for, before you work for Margaret Thatcher, you are special advisor to 3 successive Secretaries of State for Trade and Industry. Wow.
And I started my job working for the first one, Norman Tebbit, on the Monday morning after the Brighton bombing the previous week. And of course, Norman and his wife were very, very badly hurt. His wife was left paralysed. And my first meetings with Norman Tebbit as his special advisor were at his hospital bed in Stoke Mandeville, where he was, mainly because she was so badly hurt. And the civil service set up a private office sort of in a, I think it was an RAF airfield quite close by. And he literally had to run the department for quite some time from his hospital bed. So it was a rather traumatic way of beginning as a new special advisor.
That's extraordinary. Do you have key moments from working with with either Norman Tebbit or any of the others? The toughest moment as a special advisor?
Well, I worked for Leon Britton as a special advisor during the Westland crisis, which a lot of people will have forgotten, but at the time was one of the great sort of political controversies where, Michael Heseltine resigned over it, Leon Britton then resigned over it, and there was a lot of speculation that Margaret Thatcher was going to have to resign over it. And I remember I spent a lot of time with Leon Britton, obviously, during that time, and I remember when he reached the conclusion that he could no longer remain in office, and so he resigned. And I was inherited by his successor, who was Paul Channon.
How does it help you to be a special advisor ahead of becoming a member of Parliament and then a Secretary of State?
Well, being a special advisor tells you about how government works. You see government from the inside, and then of course I went on and spent nearly 5 years working for Margaret Thatcher, and so when I talk about learning at the feet of the master, that was an extraordinary opportunity. And still, I've been in Parliament, as you say, for 30 years. I've been in the cabinet. I've chaired a select committee, and I go to and talk to audiences, and I tell them some of the things that I've done, and they say, yes, that's fantastic, but actually, what we really want to hear about is what was Margaret Thatcher like?
Which is exactly what I did. How do you feel about the sort of backlash against too many special advisors, political sort of types going into Parliament?
I think Parliament has always had people from sort of a political background. The great thing about Parliament is it's a mixture, and never more so now, actually. But there have always been people who have worked inside government as special advisors. David Cameron did. Before him, several of the sort of big figures of the past. Tony Newton did before him. I think Enoch Powell worked in the Conservative Research Department. So it's not as if it's new. What has happened is the role of special advisors has changed. When I was there to provide a political input, but the civil service were there to provide the policy advice, and we worked very easily alongside. And to some extent, I think that the process of government has become too politicised, particularly number 10, which has now got a huge number of political appointees in positions which always used to be held, like head of communications. My day, Bernard Ingham, a absolutely straight, civil servant. Since then, it became a politicised position. A chief of staff became a politicised position, and I'm not sure that's an improvement.
Interesting. You mentioned you were chair of a select committee. You were chair of the Culture, Media and Sport Select Committee during the phone hacking affair. Tough gig. Your toughest moment?
Well, yes. Also, possibly still the biggest audience of any parliamentary event in history, because the hearing we held with Rupert Murdoch was watched across America, it was watched across Europe, across Australia, across China. It did literally go out everywhere. And of course, we weren't at all sure that he was going to come. And, we had this slightly bizarre discussion about what would happen if he refused the summons of a select committee to appear before Parliament. And there was talk about, a cell underneath the clock in the clock tower that was reserved for this. It was a faintly ludicrous idea that we'd imprison Rupert Murdoch, but we didn't know until the very last minute that he was coming. He did then come. We had this historic hearing, and then of course, after people had listened to him speak for an hour and a half, and people were probably sort of thinking they'd just about had enough, we had this dramatic moment when somebody came up and walked round from back and put this pie in his face, which again went out live across the world.
Yeah, what were you thinking during that? Because you don't know it's a pie at the time. It could be something far more sinister.
Indeed, and it was a very dramatic moment because his then wife, Wendy Deng, was sitting behind him and sort of leapt in the air and chased this chap out. It was actually only shaving foam on a sort of cardboard plate.
Yeah.
But you're right, we didn't know that at the time. The policeman in the corner sort of didn't leap to his feet. I mean, he took a bit of time to actually gather what was going on. If you see, it's still on YouTube, and you'll see me saying rather sort of feebly, order, order, as this man was pursued out. And in retrospect, you know, I mean, the newspapers the next day, you know, I think the Sun headline was "Humble Pie" because he'd made this remark about the humblest day and all the rest. So it was treated, you know, as something to make jokes about. But you're quite right; it could have been something far worse. And I went to see the Speaker soon afterwards and said, "Look, this is, you know, a shocking event." And he said the Speaker set up an inquiry as to how it had happened, and actually changes were made.
So you've worked on media policy for many, many decades. There is one hot potato, but no, actually that's rubbish. There are so many hot potatoes in that area of public policy. Will the BBC licence fee survive beyond my lifetime and yours?
I've always felt that the BBC licence fee has many flaws. I mean, it's a flat rate charge with no assistance available. Everybody has to pay it. And, you know, there are lots of people now who, for the first time, are beginning to say, hold on, I don't watch the BBC. You know, you've got a lot of very good entertainment now available elsewhere from streamers as well as the commercial broadcasters. You've got other news providers growing, all of which is great. And the BBC, I think, is still an absolutely central pillar of the broadcasting establishment, and I would not want to see the BBC go at all. I think there will always be a role for the BBC, but I think it is difficult to go on justifying why everybody should be forced to pay a charge for it. And in time, I think that may have to change. It will take time, and the answer to your question is not probably for 10 years, but eventually I think we will have to find another way, because simply the way in which people consume TV is just changing so rapidly. And it really is the case now that people will say, hold on, I don't need the BBC, and therefore I'm not quite sure why I should be forced to pay for it.
So the end of the BBC licence fee in our lifetimes is what you think?
I would say in our lifetimes, yes.
Not imminently, but in our lifetimes.
I mean, the government initially said the other day, this will be the last licence fee settlement. The licence fee settlement runs till 2027. I don't think it will be possible to change it before then, or indeed even at that time. I think for a start, it will need for us to have moved to a world in which everybody gets their television through the internet, for instance, rather than over a TV aerial. Because once that happens, then you can adopt models like Netflix or Amazon or the other streamers and actually have a subscription. And that is simply not possible now. So those options become feasible in time, but it's going to take a bit more time.
John Whittingdale, thank you very much.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows, and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.